After Pentecost, we have celebrated a beautiful succession of 3 solemnities in the church. 2 Sundays ago, we celebrated Trinity. Last Sunday, we had Corpus Christi, and we inaugurated our hopefully annual procession with the Blessed Sacrament. And this past Friday, we also celebrated the solemnity of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So, in a row, Trinity, Corpus Christi, Sacred Heart of Jesus. But now we go back to the ordinary time, and in this B year, we're reading the Gospel of Mark. So we've read today an extract of chapter 3 of Mark. We are in the beginning of the public ministry of Jesus, and we start to notice this initial opposition and resistance to his preaching and ministry. So today I want to offer a couple of observations, insights on today's gospel that hopefully will allow us to cherish, live more deeply what we have heard. So the first observation is Jesus today receives, I would say, 2 harsh criticisms from his relatives, but also from the scribes. In the first paragraph of today's gospel, we have heard that his relatives thought that he was out of his mind, that he was going nuts. In fact, the text says that they were so concerned about him that they went out to seize him because they thought he was out of control. He was skipping meals. He was so invested in what he was doing that they got concerned about him. And again, the text says they thought he was out of his mind. The scribes, on the other hand, they didn't think he was out of his mind, but they said he was possessed by Beelzebub, so that he was with the demon inside. But not only that, but they also said that he had the power of the demons to cast out demons. So what we're seeing is chapter 3 of the gospel, very much at the beginning of his ministry. People are thinking that he's out of his mind, and people are thinking that he is possessed by demons. And if we look carefully at this, we see how wrong can people be? Because they call him crazy, and he is the intelligence of God himself. They call him he's going nuts, but he is the Logos of God. He is the wisdom of God. They call him that he's possessed, and he is the power and the light of God himself. So what we're seeing in today's gospel is how unreliable is the opinion of people. How mistaken people can be in understanding who Jesus is. And I think we can relate this with our life. Because I think that today's gospel is an invitation for us to take with skepticism, with a certain healthy skepticism, the opinion that people have of us. Because if they were so wrong in their opinion of Jesus, perhaps they could also be wrong when people have opinions about us. And with this, I'm not saying we shouldn't care about what people say. I'm not saying that. Because sometimes what people are saying is true and can help us. But what I'm saying is we should be skeptic about investing too much of ourselves in what people think. Sometimes it happens that we rely too much on the good opinion of people. And when people praise us, we get too invested in it and we put too much stock of ourselves in their good opinion. And sometimes happens that when people have a criticism of us, and when you hear that someone said something about you, you go like this, "Ooh," because we put too much stock in what people think of us. So I think that a healthy spiritual life allows us to be skeptical both about good opinions and bad opinions. And to know that what really matters is who I am before God, and not so much who people think I am. Because people can be so mistaken that they think that the Lord is possessed and nuts. Second observation, today Jesus says, a house that is divided in itself cannot be sustained in time. He says this because the scribes think that with the power of Satan, he is expelling Satan. And he says, how could this be possible? A house divided in itself cannot withstand. And I think that this phrase, although he says it in the context of responding to the scribes, sheds a lot of light on families. Because I think we could also say the same thing about families. When a family is divided, a family cannot sustain itself in time. The family will fall apart. But you know where I think the true unity of family lies in, besides faith? I think the true unity of a family, of a household, relies on the love of mom and dad. I think that the uniting element of a family is always the love of mom and dad. And I'm going to give you an example, and you will know that I'm right. You can have a family that goes through economic difficulties. You can have a family that goes through health issues. You can have a family that goes through different crises. But we all know that if in that family mom and dad love each other, there is no crisis that that family cannot withstand. Because the true uniting factor in a household is the love between mom and dad. But I want to make an observation. Because the life of parents is so busy, especially when they have small kids, normally what happens is the first thing that gets sacrificed is the romantic love between mom and dad. And that's why I think it's so useful and important when parents, even when they have small kids and their life is hectic and busy, they still allow themselves the time for mom and dad and for a romantic moment. And that's why I was so impressed. I invited a lady from the congregation to join us for a meeting on a Thursday. And she said, sorry, Father, but Thursdays is my date night with my husband. And she has 4 small kids. And I said, good for you. Keep your date night. Because in a household, when mom and dad are together, then the household is united. And I remember when I was growing up, and this is a small detail from my parents, but it meant so much to me. I remember sometimes when we were driving in the car, my dad would be driving, and my parents would hold hands there in the car. As a kid, I felt so comforted and so safe when my parents had that expressions of love. Because again, the Lord says today, a household divided in itself cannot be sustained, but when a household is united in the love of the parents, then certainly they can withstand whatever difficulty comes along their way. So I guess I want to encourage parents, even if you have small kids, allow yourselves time to be together. Allow yourselves time to renew the romance and to encourage the romance, because the center of a household is always the love between mom and dad. Last observation. Today it also says that people come up to the Lord and they say, your mom and your brothers are looking for you. And Jesus has a mysterious answer. He says, who are my brothers and my sisters and my mother? Those who do the will of God. The first impression I get when I hear this passage is, wow, Jesus is really giving his mom a hard time. It's like saying, Mom, you're not relevant anymore. I got bigger matters to take care of. But that's a superficial understanding of this passage. Because think about it carefully. Who is the one who does most perfectly the will of the Father? Mary. So when Jesus is saying, who is my mother and my brother and my sister, he is really saying, Mary is the one who is most united to me, because she is the one who does more perfectly than any other person the will of the Father. But I think this text is also reminding us that the bonds of the flesh are important, but more important than the bonds of the flesh are the bonds of the Spirit. And that's why this happened to me, and I'm sure this happened to you too. When I was growing up, I had my friends in high school, but our friendship wasn't based on the spiritual life. It was based on, we were buddies from high school. And then I met the Catholic Advance movement, and then I met a whole new group of friends. And you know what happened? The new friends that I made in the movement became so much closer friends than my friends from high school, because they were brothers and sisters for me because of our spiritual life together. And this is a beautiful reminder that the Lord wants us to find in our parishes, in our movements, in our small groups, brothers and sisters who want to do the will of God like us. This text reminds us of the need of fraternity, and that's why I want to echo one more time what Bishop Hebda encourages all of us in this diocese. Every Catholic in a small group, because Bishop Hebda knows that we need the fraternity that comes from the Spirit, the friendship of people who are wanting to do the will of God, that sometimes can be as important as the bonds of the flesh. So, brothers and sisters, number one, remember that the opinion of men and women are many times unreliable. That's why don't take too much stock on what people think of you. They thought of Jesus that he was possessed and that he was nuts. We should care a little bit of what people think, but not too much. Second, a household that is divided cannot sustain itself in time. Moms and dads, remember that the center of the household is the love between you two. So there are no excuses. Not even 4 kids can be an exception, can be an excuse. You should always work on your romantic life, on making stronger that bond. And finally, remember that the bonds of the flesh are important, but Jesus reminds us that he is more bound to his mom, not so much because they're bound by the flesh, but because they're bound by the Spirit. And this reminds us of how much Catholics we need the fraternity of small groups. So if you don't have a small group yet, consider strongly signing up for one.